Great stuff. Okay. Those who are here are here. Thank you. Thank you for the note. I think let's get started. And thank you for your time today. It's what, 6 o'clock Singapore time, and I know it's a lot earlier in Europe and probably some really early time if you're dialing in from the United States. So I'm David Lim, and thank you for being on today's webinar on how to create a signature story. So what's going to happen now is that if you're just dialing in, what's going to happen now is that I'm actually going to present a very shortened version of my signature story. After that, I'm going to take a few questions, and then I'm going to get down to the nuts and bolts on how you can develop, create, and construct your own signature story, whether for your own personal satisfaction, or whether you think that some means you want to monetize it or have it as part of your business, whether you want to become a professional speaker, a topic expert, and you want the signature to be part of that whole commercial entity. So I'm going to start running today by actually starting with my signature story, and that's lessons from Everest. Lessons from Everest is really about distilling, something like 20-30 years of climbing experiences, leading teams on mountains into very simple tools that teams and people can use to make what they do better, or basically how they can lead themselves and others better. And I would just like to start off on a session like this by showing this picture of me, taken more than 10 years ago, getting nearly to the top of a virgin mountain. And so this is it. Everyone who climbs for different reasons. And I'm no different, except that I think I like to climb because I like to know what I'm capable of doing in a very beautiful and sometimes hostile environment. So this picture you see here is not set nowhere near Mount Everest, but the challenges are very similar. The challenges are facing the unknown, dealing with team members, finding a unified force against a common goal, for example. So I think one thing that in any signature story that's good to have is to have, Danny, if you're having some problems, basically, why is your screen black? I do not know that, actually. You might need to spotlight the speaker in this particular instance, I think. Or maybe Pam, on your side, maybe you can help Danny out. He's having a few problems there. Let's see now. Just making sure that the people are coming across okay. They seem to be coming across okay. So why climb, right? So why do anything? So I think finding your purpose, what's your mission in general, is a very important part that's often not talked about in the corporate world. So if you're in a corporate world, this is one of the things they don't talk very much about, unless maybe you're in a startup or you are in a course-related kind of work. It's the big why. So why climb, right? It's cold, you don't get paid unless you're a professional mountaineer. I was only a professional mountaineer for 2 years out of the 30 years I've been climbing. But personally, I like to climb because, as I said earlier, I like to find out what I'm able to do in a beautiful and sometimes hostile environment. So I think just if you just take a look at the first of just a handful of points today that I'm going to cover, because I'm telling you this as part of a 15-minute version of my signature story, and usually it's about an hour or so. But I'm just going to cover 4 key points. And I think knowing why you do what you do is very important, because knowing it helps you persist. Knowing you have this mission, this goal, this lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, makes you want to overcome all those various obstacles and problems that prevent you from experiencing or enjoying that particular thing. And then the thing that I'm best known for in the region, of course, leading the first Singapore Everest Expedition, was really about, in many ways, selling the dream. So if any one of you out there are a business owner, or you're in a kind of a work environment in which part of your work involves you trying to sell a dream. It could be your company's dream, it could be your personal dream, for example. This is where I think what we call the rubber meets the road of life. This is where, when we began our mission to put a group of Singaporeans, people from a flat tropical island, on top of the world, and this is, I think, where we begin to realize that reality was very different from our dreams. Because selling a dream requires a whole different set of skills. it requires a set of skills to persuade the other party that you can deliver the value that they want as a potential sporting sponsor. Of course, the challenges are that it's a sport that isn't really a televised sport. And it's a sport that's extremely new to Singapore in that context way back in the 90s. And of course, this team was relatively untried. So heaps and heaps of challenges to this group of people, myself included, who are like working professionals. So today, as I said before, instead of telling you a lot about how to create a signature story, the first 15 minutes I'm going to spend telling you, showing you, rather than telling you my signature story. I think one of the challenges about selling the dream is that you've got to create a level of conviction between yourself and the people that join the team. So when we first announced we were looking for members of the team, you imagine this is how the newspapers carried it out, right? 10 climbers wanted for daring adventure, climbing Mount Everest. You know, salary none, working conditions harsh, food poor, prospect of return slim. I mean, which Singaporean is going to sign up for a mission like that? But eventually, some stepped up and some did. And that's where you know you've got something going. So I think the second key point of this very short session here is really about there is magic in stretch goals. There's a magic when a group of people come together and fundamentally share some key values and an objective. And that kind of group, those kind of people are ready for what I call stretch goal. It's a goal that's going to push them beyond their comfort zone, push them in an area of uncertainty where success is uncertain, where there's a real danger to life and limb, and which they have to put aside a lot of their more corporate or worldly ambitions to do this project for 3.5 years. But when you've got the people, things start to move. Of course, the second thing I always say that the magic of goal setting and goal getting, which is the most important part, is taking massive action. That means every day you tell yourself, what is it you're going to do? In small and big ways, it's going to take you one step closer to that goal. So that's how goals are achieved. They're achieved one day at a time. They're not achieved by leaps and bounds. They're often achieved just one day at a time. So you begin to plan training expeditions to wherever you can, New Zealand, the Himalayas. Here, the picture here is winter in Korea, ice climbing. And so this is what you need to do because there's so snow and ice in Singapore, is that we are rather deprived when it comes to mountains. And of course, you go on your first expedition and you think that everything is going well because we have a shared goal, and then you're so badly mistaken as a leader. So if some of you here are thinking of going into a leadership position, leading your own company, or whether you are in a corporate environment where you have to lead others, sometimes things on the mountains are no different than your office environment. People can behave badly, people can behave selfishly at mountains, and then you think that, well, we have a shared purpose and that's enough. It isn't enough. People need to understand that they need to behave. They need to contract each other to behave in a certain way. And that didn't really happen in India when we went on our first trip together as a group of climbers. But luckily, at the end of that 3-4 weeks of no success, we came together and had some very serious conversations about the mistakes that all of us, including myself, made. And then we saw this beautiful mountain you see in this picture here, which is not very far from Leh, which is the capital of Ladakh. It's not a difficult mountain, but we had just 3 days to climb that mountain and come back, 3 very long days. And we did succeed that. So we managed to snatch a small victory from the jaws of defeat. And this is the third point. This is one of the biggest lessons I learned about creating winning teams. So if you're in a team as a team member or you're a team leader, I think there are 3 things that really help teams. One is that I think you play a part in creating the environment that nurtures the kind of behaviors you want to see happen. So I come to the second part. You want to have SOBs governing that group of people, specific observable behaviors that drive or work against the goal. So obviously you want to see specific, that means they're identifiable. Observable means you can see it. And then basically their behaviors, it's not a thought, a promise, an intention, it's a behavior. And of course, last but not least is you need to have that kind of level of fierce dialogue and conversations that will drive that team forward. Not situations where everyone just overly polite with each other and you don't say what's on their mind. So all these are skills and habits that can be cultivated, wherever you are, whether you're on the mountain or whether you're off the mountain. Very, very important. And finally, you get to Mount Everest, right? 3.5 years, many expeditions. And it's not, it's an unusual thing standing 10 kilometers away and seeing this force of nature, standing still 3.5 kilometers above your head. And all of us just felt silent for a while. Nobody wanted to say anything because we were just awestruck by this incredible force of nature. And this is us, right? In 1995, highly disorganized. Look at our group photo. And this is just in 1998. Now let's take a look at it. This is 95, this is 98, right? Huge difference, right? And then you finally get the grips of the mountain, the most challenging part, the most difficult part. And the dangers on the mountain, and lots of parts of the mountains are unstable and can kill you very, very easily. And eventually, you know, we all get ready for the summit. And on that critical 5 to 6 day push for the summit, after your supplies are in position and your body's acclimatized, you then go for it. You then make that big push. But I think a mistake I made during those 6 weeks on the mountain was that I didn't do this, which is point number 4, which I didn't take care of myself. I think if you don't really take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. And I was really exhausting myself when others were resting in between the climbs up and down the mountain. I was doing things like getting more information from other teams, exploring different options in case of an emergency. So I don't think I was as rested as I could have been. And eventually I had 2 cracked ribs, just on this side here, and excruciating pain, and my personal dream of Everest was over. And now, you know, it's really disappointing. So how do you cope with such disappointments? I think the way to cope with it is to ask yourself, well, what do you want now? And I really wanted the team to succeed. And slowly and gradually, over a period of 1 or 2 days over this week, I begin to regain my motivation again. Because although my personal dream of climbing Everest was taken away, the team's dream was still alive. And that's what happened to them. They got to this point in the South Summit, just about 100 meters away from the top. And nobody wanted to climb further because all the teams, including our team, had run out of rope. Yes, the safety rope that people clip into. And you couldn't get down the mountain, disengage the rope, and bring it back up. So, you know, I think life is defined by setbacks and decisive moments. What's happened to the world and a lot of us in the last 1.5 years with COVID is something like that. These are decisive moments and setbacks that can actually send your business, yourself in a whole new, different and positive direction. I could crush your business, crush your professional aspirations completely. And a lot of it, believe it or not, is within your control. So I think at a critical stage like this, what's the dialogue happening? What's the conversations happening in that team? That's really important to govern and to manage that. Eventually, we have positive, fierce conversation going on about how to get to the top. Eventually, 2 of my team were picked. I picked 2 who were going to make a second and final attempt, which they did just 2 days after the first failed attempt. And they got to the point where they turned back 2 days earlier. And then just before 6 o'clock, we heard young Edwin's voice on the radio. And all he said was, you know what, I think I've reached the vertical end of the earth. And there it is, right? An enormous moment for a small, flat, tropical country. An enormous moment for one single member of the team. The second guy, Sui, he came out about 40 minutes later. But of course, you know, my story doesn't end there. I came back from Singapore. We were all national heroes. And then I came in with this rare disorder called Guillain-Barre Syndrome, where a rare nerve disorder attacks your nerves, destroys your nerves, and renders you paralyzed. In my case, from eyes downwards. So I could only move my left eyelid, and most of the time I was in this paralyzed state for about nearly 6 months. And the worst part about this is that you're aware of what is going on. It doesn't affect the brain, but the rest of your body is just well, you're unable to move, you're paralyzed. So a machine has to breathe for you. So 43 days on a ventilator was my story. Lots of antibiotic-resistant pneumonia, I don't know, gunk filling up your lungs, drowning in your own fluids. So when I've been looking at all those horrible stories about COVID victims going through weeks of ventilator support, I can understand exactly what they're going through, the struggle to just breathe, to stay alive. And so here's a short video right, of me actually about 2 weeks being discharged, where I was slowly recovering. Let's watch this video here. And of course, the video doesn't run when I want it to run. It really doesn't run with that. All right, never mind. The video doesn't run when I want it to run, but that's okay. So, and that's it. So altogether, you know, you spend 6 months, you spend 6 months in hospital, trying very much to come back to some normalcy, and truly much harder mountain than climbing Mount Everest. So what can we learn from something like, from a sort of catastrophic experience like this? Well, I think one of the things what we learn is that we need to focus on what we can control. Think about this, right? Even if your life is between the square walls of a hospital room, what is it you can control? The moment one finger, one hand can work, you can do things. You can point at letters on an alphabet chart to communicate, but you can't speak, right? And you count these little small breakthroughs as major successes on that journey. So having good people around you is very important. And then again, when you leave the hospital with the 2 disabled legs that I did, what can you learn? You learn about focusing what you can control. You can control, well, you can control the kind of leg braces like you see in this picture that you can find on the open market and find a way to get back to climbing. So eventually you do go back to climbing to the highest mountain in America, like Aconcagua, and you climb it with a good friend. Good partners are so important. And I think the big lesson there on my journey coming back was asking for help. Something that a lot of successful people have problems with. And the moment you can overcome that, you'll be even more successful, because you will find people who will give you that kind of help. And but when you didn't ask for help, that's when the 2 of you or your team starts not to work so well. And that's one of the humbling lessons that I learned on this trip with my friend Wilfred. Because whenever I didn't ask for help, we didn't do so well. And eventually, you know, you get to stand on top of that mountain after weeks and weeks of work, the tears start running down your eyes. And there's nothing greater than winning your life back. And that's what comeback is about. So I think the way ahead, the next 6 to 12 months for most of us in this world is a bit like this. You're climbing a virgin peak, similar to the photo I began this session with, not knowing what's around the corner, but with good processes, with a good mindset, for example, a good team, there's no telling what you can do in succeeding. So this is, I always think the most successful teams and people in the world don't have everything that they want. They make use of everything that they already have. All right. So that's it. So that's my signature story in less than 20 minutes, in 18 minutes, a TED Talk 18 minutes here. So now it's 1 hour, but so instead of telling you about my signature story, I decided to show you by actually giving you an 18-minute version of it. So what I like now is that at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a little button and a menu bar at the bottom, there's Q&A. So I'm going to just kind of just 2 or 3 minutes of answering a few questions about that signature story. And now I want to move to the meat of the session, where we're going to have like 15 minutes covering how do you create your own signature story. Because I know a lot of you have this on your mind. I like to have one. I think I have one, but I don't have a life as interesting as you fill in the blank, right? An Olympian, Everest climber, for example. And the beauty about what I'm going to share in the meat of the session very shortly is that you don't have to have that. I've heard some fantastic signature stories which are funny, they are transformational, but they've got nothing to do with like enormous feats of endurance or courage at all. So just go to the bar and all right, we have one question here. Let me just go click that question there and see what do we have here. Just one moment here. Let's see what we have on the question. Oops. Yeah, Pam, let's see now. For some reason, I can't call up the one moment here. Okay, let me call up the Q&A. I can see there are a couple of questions there, but I can't seem to open that panel on my Zoom for some reason today. Would you like to share it with me? So Pam, there were like, seems like 2 questions. Questions of what was the hardest part of your journey? There were several parts which I think were quite hard. One was raising the nearly $1 million needed to make that expedition a success. The other part I think was firing someone from the team who was like the longest, was a person who was associated with the expedition for the longest time. He was my number 2, but he did a lot of really unproductive and toxic things to the team in the final year, and he had to go. And I hated every moment I had to think about, and I eventually have to do the right thing by firing him from the team. And of course, the third thing is coming back from Guillain-Barre Syndrome. Coming back from GBS was much harder than climbing Everest. How long did we train? Well, we took a 3.5-year journey. Now, I know that some people will train for Everest in just a given 1 year, but if you take a look at that 1 year, they probably took a whole year off their life to train, and it's possible to do it, but you need a lot of money, you need a lot of motivation, and you'll need to pick up a lot of skills in a very short space of time. We did 3.5 years because we wanted to go to Everest with more than just the minimal amount of experience. We wanted to climb 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 meter mountains before we even stepped a foot on Everest. So we had kind of a different kind of philosophy. A lot of people these days are in a big rush to climb Everest. They just want to do it for themselves. They don't want to form a team. They don't want to train up a team. They don't want all that challenge that's involved in that. They just want to go and climb Everest for themselves. And that's completely justifiable, right? It's just a different way of approaching things. But yes, it took about 3.5 years for this particular mission. Thank you for those questions. So right now, I think I'd like to switch over to well, the meat of the matter, right? Your signature story. So I think in any signature story, you need to have a combination of all these factors here that you have here. You want to be able to move people. You want to intrigue them to learn more about perhaps your expertise. So your expertise is so although my expertise in that session was about leading and climbing mountains, I've taken it one level, a level of abstractions that now I can teach teams and companies and clients about how they can lead their teams better. So suddenly those skills begin to translate to a large degree into forms and manifestations that people want to pay money for. And that's what I've done for the last 21 years. I've monetized the skills I've learned as an expedition leader into corporate outcomes that people want. All right, now you may not have such an intention, but that's a possible route for you. So you intrigue them to want to learn more, you impress them, of course, and then you be relevant to them. So that's really important because you may have a great skill, you may have a great topic in mind, you may have a great story, but it's not really relevant for them. They might want to hear it, but nobody wants to pay for that. And here's the thing about people who want to pay people like me to work with them. They don't want small incremental improvements usually. They want something transformational. It's like this, if you pay a coach, you pay a mentor, a professional coach, a mentor, say, look, my business is here and I want it to be like that in about 1.5 years' time. Can you help me? If I can, I'm going to pay you quite a bit of money. Why? Because that's what you want for the time and money you put in something. You want some kind of transformational experience. So ultimately, I think if you learn some stuff from, and by the way, these are some slides I've stolen from my Everest Speakers Academy, because we have one whole section on the 23-part series on professional speaking on how to create a star signature story, something they'll always remember, right? STAR. And the thing about it is that I learned a lot about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Now, he created these concepts about how in any signature story, it's very much about the hero's journey. So the hero's journey starts with the green circle there, right? In the normal world that we live in, like we were in Singapore. And then something happens, disruption or something dramatic happens. Last year, it was COVID for most people, right? And then we go in this, what we call the pit. The pit is where you're terrible, your life is transformed, you've had some illness, your company's gone bankrupt, something like that. And then during this horrible time that you're in the pit, you have a breakthrough or you meet a mentor. Something happens that gives you some clarity and some way out of this. And then you begin to return to the world with these newfound skills. But then you don't return the world in the same form that you experienced earlier. You return the world changed in many ways. And that self-awareness leads you to a new normal. So that's in a classic circular way, is what I call the hero's journey that has been espoused in hundreds of Hollywood movies. So here are the 7 basic plots, right? One is defeating the monster, right? Defeating the monster, the quest to find and destroy the monster. The second is the classic rags to riches kind of story. The third is the quest. Jason and the Argonauts, my story about Singapore's quest to climb Everest, voyage and return. So my story could be a combination of 3 and number 4. Your story could be just be a pure comedy or pure tragedy, it really depends. And 7 is rebirth and transformation. So I think my signature story is probably a combination of 3, 4, and 7. So which story is the best for your purpose? All of you listening here. Well, I think it really depends, right? Depends that if you're going to the marketplace and you want a kind of a incredible monster slaying story, well, take a look at Apple's 1984 inspired TV commercial that ran during the Super Bowl, for example. It's been studied for the last 3 to 4 decades, really, about one of the best advertisements ever to run during the Super Bowl. Why? Because it suited the purpose that Apple wanted to bring to the marketplace. We have a monster slang. We have this incredible machine called the Macintosh, right? And you know, I think when you start showing your expertise, your signature story, and how you got to your conclusions, you then become kind of like the topic expert or specialist, especially when you combine it with the leading edge information and research that's happening. So that helps a lot. And then basically, if you are thinking of monetizing what you do, to what extent, you know, are your stories kind of like centered around your clients who want to experience rebirth? They are in a transformational stage. They have been disrupted. Now they want to find a way out. They want to attract new recruits. They don't have a kind of a signature story. The company doesn't have a kind of exciting story. So is there a way that they can develop a story like this? So this is what you have, right? So you need to have, you need to keep it really simple. You need to have a higher concept. You need to be really authentic about who you are and what you represent. And of course, the classic, monomyth, right? Overcoming the odds against a common enemy or common opposition. So that's the 7 basic plots really of a star signature story. So again, at this stage here, I'll stop talking, right? And I want to hear some of your questions here regarding creating a signature story. Because I know for all of you out there, maybe in your mind you already have one, but you want to develop it. Maybe you don't have one and you want to create one. Maybe you have one now, you want to monetize it. So I want to hear questions from all of you here as to what is it? What is it about the hero's journey do you think that you can pull into your own story? So let's get a few of your questions coming in. Let's see. Oh, there was one question that came in at the tail end. I didn't quite cover. What qualities do you prefer your team to have? I think I like to have my team. One of the qualities I like to have is the ability for them to challenge. If there's an open-ended issue, I like them to be able to challenge even my own thinking about it in a respectful, collegial way. Just like I would challenge them if I disagree with them. I think that's one of the great qualities that a good team has. The last thing you want is a whole bunch of yes men or yes women, for example, in your team, right? This again the classic question here, right? What if I don't have a super adventurous story? You know something? I got a friend of mine who has a signature story about him teaching his son how to drive a car. He's sitting there. The only props on stage, it's him and a chair, or maybe 2 chairs, and he's sitting on one of that, and he's pretending to be in a car with his like 16 or 17-year-old son, and he's teaching the son to drive. It's a very humorous story, and he's really fine-tuned that story for years, and it's one of his signature stories. And one of the lessons behind it is basically that how do you deal with the unexpected, and how do you persuade or influence other people who have very strong ideas about doing something in a particular way. So by using that story, he's really established himself as an expert in that field. I mean, that story doesn't define it, but I'm saying that he has other skills. His other skill sets about that story is a fantastic, what we call a signature story. Every time he goes to a client and a client has heard him before, he says, can you please tell that story? Because obviously, we as humans, we learn through storytelling. That's a huge, fantastic tradition we have since the days that we hunted mammoths, brought meat and food back to the cave, and over the cave and the fireplace there, we would eat the meat and we would tell stories about the hunt. So as humans, as I say, we are meaning makers. We make meaning out of the story. So to that person who asked that question, this is a fantastic question which I knew that people were going to ask today. What if I don't have such an adventurous story? It doesn't matter. Because that signature story is unique to you. No one else can have that story. That's why it's so important to find those great stories in your own life or within your close network. My uncle had this fantastic experience. Now I'm going to put a spin on it, and it's going to benefit you from hearing this fantastic story I'm going to develop for you. That could be a signature story. It might not necessarily involve you as the main protagonist, but someone that's close to you perhaps, but whatever it is, it's unique. No one else can borrow that story or steal that story from you. Do you recommend any books on storytelling? Okay, it's a little bit academic, but if you want to know the nuts and bolts of story construction, Joseph Campbell's is The Man with 1,000 Faces, something along those lines. I read it a long time ago, I think, here. But Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, just Google some sources and you'll get to a couple of books. It's all a bit academic, you know, but it's a good foundation to understanding is about basically this is how you tell a story, or this is how you create a story. And you've heard of story arcs, maybe, right? You watch TV shows where, although every episode covers some incidents or some drama which is wrapped up neatly within the 48 minutes of that 1 hour TV show, the TV show these days often include what we call recurring themes. There's a mystery maybe somewhere, and there's an arc, and the arc may only end after 3 seasons, where maybe that thing the main protagonist has been looking for reveals itself after 3 seasons. We've all seen this in some of the more recent TV shows over the last 10 or 20 years. But yes, understand how story works and find out the story that works for you. Like I said, there are basically 7 basic plots. Where does your story fall into? And then here's the key thing, right? How do you make it memorable? How do you make stories memorable, right? How do you make stories memorable? Oh, hang on, the story. Do you think it's important for every business to have a story to tell? Well, isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that that I showed this picture here, right? All right. Now think about this, right? 2 men start a computer business in their garage. They become wildly successful at an extremely young age. One of them with a huge ego basically upsets corporate types. He gets kicked out of the company that he created. He goes into the wilderness for a couple of years working on a different project or different company. And then his original company suffers and may even collapse. Then they bring him back and he comes in back like a hero on a white horse and introduces stuff like the iMac and the iPod and revolutionizes how we view our personal computer gadgets. I mean, think about it. This is the Apple story. This is the Steve Jobs story, right? So I think it's so totally important for every business to have some kind of story about the founder. And many startups have a kind of story. Why did I start my cake business, my chocolate business? Why did I start my my gaming chair business, right? There's a Singaporean who is a billionaire now because he runs one of the world's most famous computer gaming chair businesses, for example. All right. So this is it, right? So I think it's so important for companies to have it because one thing now, you're fighting to get the best people to your company. Nowadays, young people, they don't just want to join any company. They want to join a company that's got some kind of message, some meaning. Maybe this company does something that's very meaningful to the world. They want to work for that kind of company. They just don't want to be a corporate stiff in a very large multinational that seems to have lost its way, that doesn't have a compelling story or mission. So this picture is really, really mood, right? I think one of the best books on telling a story that's memorable is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, right? I think was Chip or Dan is a professor at Stanford, but the thing about it, the book can be read in one long rainy afternoon, right? It's not a big read, but it's one of the greatest books on how to write and create a story that's very memorable. And they deconstruct it based on their research into 6 basic things, basically, to make a story memorable. So number 1, you start off by to start off with something that's a surprise or a mystery. It intrigues people, right? 2, you keep the story simple. 3, you use concrete examples. So don't say it was 300 feet away. Say it was about the length of a football field. See, that's a concrete example, right? And then basically you get a credibility by expressing your expertise in a way that audience can form a picture about what you're trying to tell them. And then use emotion. Stories can be very emotional. Stories can make you cry, can make you laugh. And that's what people remember. That's how they remember the story. I once, in my 20 years ago, when I was trying to be all expertise and having a large number of corporate clients for the first time in my life, and I decided I was going to leave out the story of my personal illness and what I learned about resilience and coming back. So I left it out because I thought, well, it's a corporate audience. I'm going to come across all like an expert. And my client came up to me later and says, Dave, what happened to the whole Guillain-Barre Syndrome story in the hospital, 6 months in the hospital? Why did you leave it out? And then the penny dropped. I began to realize that that's what people want. They want to hear stories to move them emotionally so they can make certain changes. They want any transformation begins emotionally first. If you can't move your audience or the client in your pitch emotionally, you're not going to get very far. So tell stories. All right, this is one of the best books you can borrow, or you can get a second-hand copy, Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Here's a question. I'll stop for. Here's a question by Arne. If you want to instill inspiration and learning in people you tell a story to, how can you ensure evaluate outcomes of this? Is there a good way to make sure people take things away from the story? Or is the story rather a one-way thing with mostly open effect? Wow, 3 very big questions altogether. All right, Arne, that's one of the best triple questions I've come across. So how do we evaluate outcomes? Yeah, here's the interesting thing is, right, you know, I've been a paid keynoter for 21 years. That means most of my work is some client flying me somewhere in the world, paying me a very nice sum of money to tell a similar kind of story based on their outcomes. So when telling what outcomes, Dave, I want you to budge the needle. You're speaking at 2 to 3 p.m. The morning's discussing strategy X. Now I want you to help the audience get emotionally more on board with this strategy X. All right, whether you make them laugh a bit, cry a bit, doesn't matter here. So that by the time we end that day, I will know that that needle has been nudged somehow. How will I know it? People will tell me. So this is it, right? The outcomes are never defined by you as the speaker or the story creator. It's always defined by the client. And when the client, sometimes just forget the feedback forms. Just walking around and hearing the conversations after your session will come back to you and says, you know what? Everyone's talking about that concept ABC that you introduced. We're using it. We use it the following day very often as well. Straight away, the client can see that for the short space of time you had with them, you've given what we call value. So that's the return on value. It's only an hour. Sometimes I'm only there for half an hour or even for an hour, right? So the client understands too that, you know, hey, let's manage expectations here, right? David's not going to change the world, right? Because he's only going to do it with 1 hour. And we have a journey of 6 months to achieve strategy X or whatever. But this is it, right? In that 1 hour, managing the expectations, you've already budged the needle, you've nudged the needle significantly. So that's what I mean by that. The second thing is that, is there a good way to make sure people take things away from the story? Yes. Create sound bites, create memorable quotes, create very short, 3-letter type acronyms that make them laugh and remember it. There are many devices that are beyond the scope of this session here, right? So this is something that I teach my coaches that I mentor basically, right? Because some of them have a great story, but they're just telling it in a very bland, forgettable way. They don't know how to salt the presentation, for example, right? Salting it means that how do you build up the suspense to something? It's like a joke, right? You tell something, then you tell something else. And the third thing you say, that's the punchline, and people laugh their heads off, right? But that is the skill and the art of storytelling and creating stories on a stage, for example. And it's a craft. You can learn it. You can learn it. The last question you had is that, is the story a one-way thing, mostly open? Well, it depends, right? This session here, I've asked questions after my signature story variation. And after this, I'm going to ask even more questions. We still have 20 minutes to go before the end of the session here, right? So again, there's so many ways that you can do that. For the longer sessions, the 90-minute ones, there's definitely a lot of interaction going on. I stop talking, I stop telling story, I stop delivering content, and then I facilitate. What will you do in this situation? Here are 6 options. Which option will you choose and then why? Let's discuss in group style. All right, and then we find out what group, this group, that group, why did you come with a decision? People like that. People like to be brought along on the journey. They're not necessarily an integral part of the story, but they love it when you help make them part of that short journey that you're walking with them. All right. So that's the thing. You got to hook them. You got to hook them into that story, whether it's the funny part, where you act out scenes in it. You get them committed to the story. They want to learn more, right? You hear, wow, what happened? You know, there's some fantastic storytellers that even I respect immensely here. And I think one of my friends, Steve Downey, he was telling a story about he stuck in the Sahara, and he was in nighttime. He was encountered a Bedouin with a knife, and the Bedouin asked him, "Follow me," and he didn't know whether he was following the Bedouin to his death or was going to be robbed and beaten up or even killed. He didn't know. But one person came to him the next day and told him, you know, I had to leave at that part of the story, but I really want to know some things. And Steve asked him, so what is it you want to know? Did you make it? and that never fails to raise a laugh, right? You know, so did you make it? I mean, it's obvious, right? He's standing there, he's alive, he's well, right? But that's the power of the story that Steve managed to create for that audience. He creates such tension and such suspense that they wanted to know what's going to happen next. And then after that, they want to know what's going to happen next. And that's the way you create a story. Like I said, we are trying to spend like 1 hour today just scratching the surface of how to create that story. Right? And of course, as I mentioned over here at the beginning of the session, take a look at the little egg-shaped thing on the edge of the screen here. You know, you've got to basically share something that shows you unquestionable value. That means it's just not a story. Whether it's a story of your company, you know, it's got to underline some kind of value that you deliver. Whether you're a so-called motivational speaker that can nudge the needle of people's mindsets and beliefs, or whether you're presenting or pitching something of your products, or maybe a startup in which by the end of that story, people realize, wow, this thing has got incredible value and it's unquestionable. That's what you want to create. All right, so it's all the part of the storyline. And this question, I think I already answered this question, right? What if my topic is dry and I'm not such an interesting person? Okay, you know, that's the thing. I met many people that you will meet them, they're just fairly ordinary people. You know, they haven't flown combat missions in a war, they haven't won an Olympic medal, they haven't climbed Everest with one leg, for example. I met many people who were just fairly ordinary people, but they had one thing that happened to them in their lives, that they managed to take that, have that create a transformational impact and effect on their life. And now they're telling that story about how that thing changed their life or other people's lives. That's their signature story. So this is it, right? Look into your friends, your relatives, people you're very close with, something that happened to you. Sometimes the most interesting things happen to the most uninteresting people. What happens next is totally up to them. How they tell that story so that it becomes relatable and people can learn and take away something very useful from that story. All right, so here are some things you can do. Find something interesting about your work that nobody knows. Okay, find something about how about telling a story about someone or something else that how you've improved their condition in an unexpected way. Now, that's my role when I go on stage for 90 minutes or 60 minutes. If I can't improve the unique condition of even one person in the audience after that 1 hour, then I failed. I'm not worth the fee that I charge. Right? The fact that I'm getting emails from people that said, you know, that thing that you said 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and I'm reading the email that says, I don't remember. And I read it and they say, thanks to that thing you said, and they quoted at verbatim, I went ahead and you fill in the blank. And this is true. I went and completed my 2-year MBA. This is a true story. Another person said, I went and actually participated in a trek to the North Pole. And he attached in the email a photo of him with all the fur jackets and everything standing at the North Pole. So never underestimate the power of your signature story and how it can transform people. Okay, like I said, revisit something interesting that happened to you. Like I said, sometimes the most ordinary people have extraordinary things happening to them. All right, never underestimate that. All right, so that's it. That's all the content I want to share with you here. And really, it's time for your questions in the remaining 15 minutes that we have. So this is a rare occasion you have here. I mean, usually these sessions are like for the mentees on my speaker mentoring programs, but today, all of you here on A Small World get to pick my brain as to creating or improving maybe a signature story that you already have. So you have that here, and we don't have a huge book here tonight, right? I see, I'm just taking a look at the number of participants here. So please, this is your time. This is time to ask questions. So click on that link on the bottom of the menu to ask the questions that you have. I'm looking through the old questions to see whether I missed any of them. Yeah, some great questions there. And so Arn asked a great question. Amanda, is there any question from you? Eva, Fabian, Jorg, Natalie. So if you've got, all right, oh, we have a question here. Here we go. Let me go to my question box and open it up here. As a brand designer, what attracts the most clients is my work. What type of storyline should you suggest for me? Well, as a brand designer, this is really interesting. Well, I think it depends how you fell into the work that you do. Was there some transformational story, an event that happened to you many years ago that brought you into this line of work in which you do so well, for example, right? So if that story, that so-called, again, this is like the journey story, right? If that journey type of story is fascinating and can attract more eyeballs to your business, why not? Why not, right? The kind of storyline really can be, like I said, let's go back to, where was this here? Let's go back to this one. Oops. Sorry, let's go back to, where were we now? Oops, there we go. Let's go back to this one here, right? So there you are, right? So the anonymous attendee, right? It's 7 basic plots, right? Which one is yours? Right? Was it transformation? Was your journey to become a brand designer transformational? Did something traumatic happen to you? Did you have an epiphany? Maybe you were traveling one day, or maybe you saw something, maybe you experienced something that changed how you saw the world, and you saw that this way, creating brands for people, for example, was a really fantastic way to a fantastic talent that you have. So that could be a transformational type of story, for example. It could be a quest, for example. It could be part of a quest kind of story. So again, these are just some suggestions for you. Another one, if someone has a magnificent story, but is a poor storyteller, him or herself, what would you recommend? All right, so what I would recommend is, I think it really depends on how important the story is. There are some people who just love the idea of improving their so-called public speaking, which means they don't really want to make a living out of it. They don't want to monetize it. They don't necessarily want to get paid to speak. But for some reason, they've often been invited, asked to be like a kind of an casual after dinner speaker, perhaps, or people know they have this great story here, but they've always been a bit shy to tell it because they don't know how to tell it well. Well, there's so many low-cost, no-cost ways of doing it, right? You could join your local city's chapter of Toastmasters, right? Because Toastmasters, what they teach you is a lot about the form of public speaking. The different types, improvisational methods, voice projection, delivery, how to deliver humor. So in Toastmasters, a lot of ordinary people with ordinary public speaking skills get better because they go through the process, they attend the meetings and all that, for example. Then there are some people who don't perhaps take so well to that kind of group environment, or sometimes they feel a bit shy, or maybe they feel a little bit threatened. Well, that's where you might want to hire a one-on-one story coach, for example. I've done story coaching before, for example, and that's largely because the people I always tend to be professional speakers. They are topic experts and they want to create one or more signature stories or a keynote in which they can sell to a client, or if they can't sell it to a client, they want to be able to tell it really well to many corporate audiences so that people get intrigued by their topic expertise and want to know more about how they can help that organization. Okay. Oh, here we go. Here's another question here. Arn has another question. By the way, Arn, you asked some really good questions. Most storytellers I deal with have a problem with the level of detail. Usually they tend to go too deep for their audience because of their expertise, I suppose. Do you have a good suggestion of how to find the right level of detail? This is a really, really good question. And to tell you the truth, if you experience my 18-minute lessons from Everest signature story variation, right, which I began the session with, you'll notice that there isn't a single thing inside that session that talks about the finer points of mountain climbing, a specific technique that I use, a particular mountaineering problem that was, that was unique. You notice I didn't cover a single thing because most of my audience members aren't mountaineers. Right? Many of them have no interest whatsoever in climbing a mountain. But here's what they're fascinated about. They're fascinated about why people climb mountains, what they go through emotionally, what they go through physically and mentally, and fourth, what is it they can possibly learn from mountaineers and mountaineering experiences that can take away to make their own unique condition better. And that's how I deliver value. So similarly, if you have a fantastic story, look very closely. How important is this detail to my eventual aim? So you always look at the outcome you want to achieve in that audience, and you work backwards from there. Right? So you want to have them felt uplifted here, and you have a great story about a computer business you started. Nobody's interested in how you had this breakthrough about moving from 256 bus ramp to 512. Notice, they want to know about the emotional breakthroughs, the relationship breakthroughs, the mindsets that were productive in reaching that goal, because they feel that those are the things that they can adopt and embrace to improve their condition. It's the what's in it for me aspect, right? So again, this is where you elevate your unique little niche to a higher level abstraction that becomes more universal. All right. So for example, like I said, mountaineering is a very niche kind of activity, but by raising it to a high level abstraction, we deal with things like team skills, motivation, dealing with difficult people, making tough decisions. Guess what? Every single person across industries, across disciplines, all have those similar challenges, and suddenly you become very relevant to them, although your context is different from theirs. In fact, your context is even better because it's interesting, high altitude, top level mountaineering. So that hooks people and brings them in many ways. All right, well, that's a great question. The right level of detail really is up to you as a storyteller to decide. I would say only go into the detail if it's absolutely relevant. It's a bit like jokes. The best jokes are those told in the fewest number of words. When Jerry Seinfeld, if you remember, he had this very successful show in the 1990s called Seinfeld. It's called Seinfeld. And it ran for nearly 10 years. After he left that show, a very wealthy man, he decided he was going to throw away all his old material and begin to write new comedic material. And the only way to try it out was to go to old comedy clubs and to try these jokes and one-liners. That sometimes he would spend hours reducing a sentence, a punchline, the funny kicker, from 5 or 6 words, he reduced it to 3 or 4. He would spend hours just working on that. That showed his commitment to his craft as a stand-up comedian. Because in the world of public speaking and delivery and presentations, to me, the most brutal art form in this arena is stand-up comedy. You got 2 minutes, you go up there, you got to make everybody laugh once every 10 to 15 seconds. If you're not doing so, you're failing, and you're just dying out. The 2 minutes on stage feels like 20 minutes. So stand-up comedy is brutally challenging, it's highly demanding, and that is an example of how less is more. So Aaron, I hope that gives you some ideas of what you need to do about leaving out or leaving in detail. Great question. All right, we just got 5 minutes left. I just want to know whether anyone else in the 20-odd people or so are here this evening. What other questions you might have regarding creating a signature story, or maybe improving one that you have? Maybe I mean the blurb had, hey, I'm going to share a bit about monetizing it as well. I think when it comes to monetizing your keynote, and some people only have one thing, have only one keynote. I think it's important to realize is that you've got to be relevant to your client, and what you deliver has got to really fulfill what they want to achieve in that space of time. So my classic situation that I'm what I call the classic corporate so-called motivational speaker, right? I come in there for an hour and I make them laugh or cry, but the key thing about it is that I make them want to think about what they're doing in a different way. And that different way is going to help their business. And that's often defined, outlined, and the parameters of the outcomes are given by the buyer. The moment you can do that consistently and sustainably, you can start charging money for that. And that can range from anywhere with, I don't know, a few $100s to tens of thousands of dollars. So in the last 25 years, I've been paid that large spectrum of fees. Thankfully, in the last 10 years, I've been paid the upper spectrum of those fees, which has allowed me to become financially free quite some time ago. So it's been quite a journey. It's been quite a journey, and I encourage you, if all of you have got some kind of great story that you want to tell it and tell it well, because it's going to help your business. It's going to help your personal branding, even though nobody wants to pay you for that story. So I think it's something that's really worth investigating and spending some time on, if you have one and if you want one. Gosh, hold on. Oh, Q&A. Oh, there's a few more questions here. Hold on a minute. Yes, of course. The Seinfeld. I believe there's like a 2-hour, like a documentary called Comedian. It's called. It was made just a few years after the Seinfeld show ended. And it's about Jerry Seinfeld going through that journey I told you about, right? Journey in return. About him reinventing himself as a comedian again, you know, because when you're so famous and you're multimillionaire, right? You know, how do you humble yourself so that you get even better at your craft? There was one part of that show where he goes to a comedy club, and at a critical stage of his routine, he forgets the punchline. And there's some lady in the front of some old, I can't remember, the old lady who I think didn't know who he was, actually said that, "Excuse me, young man," she says, "but have you been in this business long?" I mean, this is a guy who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's in some really low-end comedy bar practicing new material when there's absolutely no need for him to do so from a pure commercial point of view. But for him, for professional growth, it was a very important part of his life journey. That's a really, really great part of the Seinfeld story after the Seinfeld show, right? The commitment to their craft. Good stuff there. All right, so we're down to the last 2 minutes. And I know, what's this? 2 more questions. Hold on one moment here. Let me go over here. What's the 2 more questions? Yeah, one question. I'm going to check. Why did I miss those 2 questions? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me go over here and open this thing up. Oh, all right. Oh, those were from Arn. Okay, so I've answered those already. So that's it. We're coming up to the hour. I've had a great time on this topic, which I rarely have an opportunity like this and this kind of platform. So I'm grateful to the people at Small World. And I'm also very grateful for you to actually you showed some interest in this very interesting topic of how to create a signature story. And I wish you the best of luck in doing so. And one last thing here, and I wouldn't say it's an advertisement here. I run a small speaking academy only for a small number of mentees who are interested to improve what they do in this area of professional speaking, as I call it here. But if you want to find out a little bit more about this aspect of my business, not the motivational speaking part for the corporates, but this part here, right? How to be a better professional speaker, how to develop a business. This is it. Go to Everest Speakers Academy and browse around there. There are lots of videos and there's some free stuff there too. So have a look if you're interested. Other than that, I'm wishing all of you a fantastic week ahead and all the best in creating your story that people will remember that's uniquely yours. Thank you very much.